So thank you so much for that. And now our guests. So I'll just give a short introduction and then I'll turn it over to them. So first we have Jeff Bisanz. He is a professor emeritus at the Department of Psychology at the University of Alberta, where the focus of his research was on cognitive development in children. He is a member of the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care and the steering committee for the Community University Partnership for the Study of Children, Youth, and Families, as well as being on the board of directors for the Mutar Foundation. And joining us as well, we have Mackenzie Martin. And Mackenzie Martin is a public policy research and evaluation associate at the Community University Partnership for the Study of Children, Youth, and Families at the University of Alberta. She recently completed her PhD, congratulations, in social policy and intervention at the University of Oxford with funding from a Rhodes Scholarship as well as a Shirk Doctoral Fellowship. And in her research, Mackenzie focuses on how to enhance child and family health and well-being through social and public health interventions with a particular focus on supporting parents. So with this introduction, I will turn it over to Jeff and Mackenzie.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I'll start. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to present some findings from the Alberta Parent Survey on Early Learning and Care. Survey was conducted in 2022, as Susan mentioned, and it was a joint product of the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care, the Mutar Foundation, and the Community University Partnership for the Study of Children, Youth, and Families, known as CUP. There's a lot in our inboxes and in the media these days about the $10 a day Early Learning and Child Care Initiative, and there's a fair amount of tension. Our survey results are not going to relieve that tension, I'm sorry to say, but we believe that finding out what parents think about early learning and childcare should provide some guidance and insights as the $10 a day plan continues to evolve. So the presentation today is based on the first two papers in a series about this survey. The team is Mackenzie, who's already been introduced. Also Ping Lam-Ip and Lauren Lees, they're researchers at CUP. Christopher Smith is with the Mutar Foundation, and I am, like everyone else on this team, with the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care. So today is our first public presentation about the survey, and we're pleased to do it before a group with such experience and expertise as you all have. So we look forward to any questions you might have, and also to any suggestions you might have for future work. Let's start with a little bit of a preview for what we're going to do. Next slide. There we go. I'll start with a little context, then I'll describe the survey itself so you get a sense of what was done. Then we'll talk about affordability and some findings and recommendations that arise out of that work. We'll also talk, or Mackenzie will talk, about accessibility and findings and recommendations that arise from that work again, and then she'll preview some of our next steps for you. The next slide, Mackenzie. Thank you. So a bit of context, which will be familiar to most of you. If you start at the top of this slide, I hope everyone can see the slides okay. The federal government and the provincial and territorial ministers signed that multilateral framework way back in 2017. And I want to just underscore one point here. This was not just a federal initiative. It was signed also by provincial and territorial ministers. It was meant to be a joint federal and provincial initiative. Below that, you see the federal budget in 2021 put forward a lot of money toward this project, over $30 billion over 5 years, and for money in succeeding years as well. Below that, then the federal provincial bilateral agreements were hammered out in 2021. These were high-level documents saying sort of agreement about the principles by which the systems would be designed in various provinces. And next, toward the bottom there, our cost control framework and for-profit expansion plan came out in January of 2023. This had more details than the previous documents, but it was still sort of a high-level plan for implementation. As many of you know, there are a lot of ambiguities in this document, and Children's and Family Services are still working on how to make this plan work. So certainly input from parents should be useful throughout this whole implementation process that's ongoing and will change over the next and will continue over the next year. In the next slide, in the original framework, 5 principles were cited as being critical for designing systems of early learning and care: quality, affordability, accessibility, inclusion, and flexibility. Today, we're going to focus on affordability and accessibility, In the future, we'll have some forthcoming papers on the other principles. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the survey itself. First, this study was funded by the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care with funds from End Poverty Edmonton and the Matart Foundation, and it was in many senses powered by CUP. Second, the survey was designed primarily by Rob Bushman and Jennifer Fisher-Summers, who were at CUP at the time. They moved on to other positions, and so the current team that you saw on that first slide has taken up the challenge of analyzing and interpreting the results. You can see a little bit about the participants there. There were over 1,400 parents. The data were collected by a social research company called Advanis from a large panel of Albertans that Advanis maintains. The data were collected in the spring and early summer of 2022, about 5 months after the new program for subsidies and affordability grants was implemented. The goal at the time was to reduce average parent fees by about 50%. The data were weighted using census data. That sounds easy, but it took quite a while. And then there's some information there about the data analyses. We looked to see if our results varied by location, by annual household income, by number of parents in the family, and by subsidy status. When we talk about location, that means we divided the province into 4 quote-unquote locations. One was Calgary, one was Edmonton, one was something we called mid-size and metropolitan municipalities, and the other was rural. Mid-size and metropolitan municipalities was our construction. It includes mid-sized cities like Lethbridge. It also includes metropolitan municipalities like Airdrie and Leduc. Now, we asked parents about their views on affordability in several ways. Next slide, please. First, do parents find their childcare to be affordable? As you can see on the slide, about a third of parents found out-of-pocket fees to be unaffordable. Parents who judged costs to be unaffordable were not limited to groups that you might generally consider to be disadvantaged. This was a very interesting finding. For example, the majority of these parents who found fees to be unaffordable had annual incomes of $90,000 or higher, household incomes of $90,000 or higher. The second way we asked the question about affordability is the cost of early learning and care important to parents? As you can see in the slide, a majority of parents identified cost as one of the 3 most important factors they would consider if they could access any childcare arrangement. Quality and location were also frequently noted, but as you can see, 4 of 10 parents considered cost to be important in choosing their current childcare arrangement as well. So the answer to the question is yes, in decision-making, cost affordability is very important for parents, for many parents. Next slide, please. Other ways we tried to approach this question of affordability and cost. Do parents face affordability barriers when they try to find childcare? It turned out that a substantial number of parents reported that they had recently experienced difficulties in finding childcare. Of these parents who recently had difficulties, as you can see on the slide, a majority reported that affordability was one of the issues that was difficult for them. Moreover, difficulties finding childcare often resulted in disruptions to employment, and many parents, 39% actually, simply quit trying to find childcare. We want to investigate these numbers more because when there are difficulties, we should know what happens to the parents who are trying to find childcare and can't find it. Is cost a reason for not using childcare? It turns out that about a third of our parents chose not to use childcare for at least one child for various reasons. Of these parents, many, as you can see, cited the high cost of childcare as an important reason for their decision. And finally, the last way in which we tried to approach this affordability and cost issue was by the question, do parents have concerns about the high cost of childcare in their communities? So asking about their neighborhoods, their area they live in, their communities. Again, a substantial number of parents expressed concerns about childcare in their communities. Of these, high cost was listed as a problem by a majority. High cost was listed more frequently than even quality of care or availability of spaces. So no matter how we ask the question, affordability and cost matter to many parents. Now, I'd like to turn to the question of whether or not income matters. And we'll just take a minute on this slide. If you look on this slide, if you see the three columns on the right, the column, if you look at those three columns, the first column is for families with household incomes of less than $75,000. Middle column, $75,000 to $119,000. The rightmost column are families with household incomes of $120,000 or more. So let's just walk through the first line of these data. Parents feel the cost of childcare is unaffordable. Well, 42% of that lower income group found childcare costs to be unaffordable. That percentage dropped, as you might expect, to the intermediate income group to 34%, a third, and to 27% for 120,000 and more for the higher income group. So you can see that there's a decline across those three categories. And notice, though, that even in the highest income categories, over a quarter of the parents were finding childcare to be unaffordable. If we go to the next line, parents feel that cost of childcare is important to consider when choosing a childcare arrangement. This is about decision making. For the lowest income group, about 2/3. For the middle income group, it goes down a bit. And for the highest income group, it goes down to just over a majority, but still a majority. The third line, parents feel that the cost of childcare is a barrier to finding childcare. You can see now that 3/4 of the parents in the low income group find cost to be a barrier. Down to 2/3 in the middle income group and down to just over half in the highest income group. And finally, in the last line, parents feel the cost of childcare is a reason for not using childcare for the parents who don't use childcare, about half in the lowest income group and down to about a third for the other two income groups. So you see that cost does matter, but if you look at the and that income matters as well. If you look down the rightmost column, you see that 27%, 53%, none of those are small numbers. These are all substantial numbers of parents. None of these numbers are even close to zero for the highest income group. So affordability and cost clearly matter to parents. How much it matters depends on family income, and it matters for many families at all income levels. Next slide, please. So, guided in part by the survey results, we generated several recommendations, and I'll walk through each of these 5 recommendations very briefly. If you get a chance to read our paper, you'll see more elaborated rationales for these recommendations. Number 1, plans to implement affordable early learning and childcare should include special measures to ensure that new funding helps families with low incomes. Given the table you just saw, measures to support families with the low incomes are needed. This is partly motivated by research elsewhere that's shown that it's not enough just to provide programs for low-income families. Special steps are taken to make sure that families can take advantage of these programs. So these special steps could include ensuring that they receive the subsidies to which they're entitled and subsidies that eliminate out-of-pocket costs for the very lowest income families. They could include creating new spaces that they can easily access, and it could include removing other kinds of barriers. Number 2, the provincial government should regularly monitor the effect of policy changes on affordability and on cost for parents. This project, this Canada-wide early learning and childcare project, is a significant social policy development involving billions of dollars. Effective monitoring is really essential for accountability and also for improving policies, and it requires informative and reliable data. In the paper, we go into some detail about what kinds of monitoring should be involved, what kinds of data would be useful. Throughout all of that, we should always be asking who benefits and who is being left behind. Number 3, reduced out-of-pocket costs for parents must not come at the expense of quality. Parents clearly care about affordability, but they also value quality. We need measures for improving the quality of early learning care for children and their families, and these measures need to be put in place to ensure that quality is not sacrificed in the service of reducing costs. Number 4, to manage costs and to ensure high quality, it may be necessary to consider alternative approaches to funding early learning and care. Alberta's current plan for implementing change to early learning and care has features that make it difficult to ensure that out-of-pocket costs for parents will not exceed the goal of $10 a day. There are alternative approaches, and I think they deserve attention. For example, several provinces use a set fee approach, and it's widely regarded as superior in terms of administrative efficiency, predictability for parents, transparency, and monitoring. So if we're having trouble with the current cost control framework, we should be looking at other alternatives as well. And finally, number 5, issues of affordability must be addressed in concert with, not separately from, issues of quality, accessibility, inclusion, and flexibility. So far, the province, and the country for that matter, is focused on affordability and accessibility. But we're running into problems because at the same time, they've not considered what steps need to be taken in a timely manner with respect to quality, inclusion, and flexibility. So we'd like to see those things worked on in concert together. So the paper and summary are available at the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care website, and you can take a picture of this QR code or get a link to them. The link is given there as well. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mackenzie and for the rest of the presentation, and we'll have questions at the end.
Great, thanks, Jeff, and thank you, Allison and Susan, for having me. So we're now going to move on to the findings of our forthcoming report on the views and preferences of Alberta parents on the accessibility of early learning and childcare. And accessibility is a key topic in both the research literature and public conversation about early learning and care in Alberta and across the country. For instance, Canadian families are facing difficulties in accessing early learning and childcare spaces due to poor coverage rates and supply issues. And while accessibility is an issue across Canada, a 2023 study found that 60% of children in Alberta live in a childcare desert, compared to 48% of children in Canada. So accessibility is an important issue facing Alberta families. Data on the views and preferences of Alberta parents resulting from our survey are intended to provide valuable information to inform decision-making about critical accessibility topics, such as the province's objective of creating over 68,000 new early learning and childcare spaces by 2025-2026. So to get into the details, our survey questions were designed to measure 2 aspects of accessibility: the availability and location of early learning and childcare arrangements. There are different ways to define the accessibility of early learning and care. For instance, some definitions incorporate whether the features of early learning and childcare environments are conducive and welcoming to all children, such as those with disabilities or from ethnic minorities. For our survey, we defined accessibility as the availability and location of early learning and childcare arrangements because inclusion-related topics will be covered in a future report. We have a lot of findings about parent views and preferences on the accessibility of early learning and childcare in the province. So today I will summarize our major findings. Once our report on accessibility is released, you will be able to read more about what we found. So first things first, how important is accessibility to parents? We found that if parents were able to access any type of childcare arrangement, 56% identified accessibility as one of their top 3 most important factors. Almost half of these parents identified location as a top 3 factor. And interestingly, parents with higher incomes, parents with subsidies, and parents living in more urban areas were most likely to identify that accessibility overall was a top 3 factor. Next, how did accessibility inform decision-making about their current childcare arrangement? We found that 72% of parents identified accessibility as one of their top 3 reasons for choosing their current childcare arrangement. Over 2/3 of parents identified location as a top 3 reason for choosing their current arrangement. Next, do parents experience accessibility-related difficulties in finding childcare? And if so, what are the consequences? Nearly 1/3 of parents reported difficulty finding childcare in the past 3 months. Of these parents, approximately half reported an accessibility-related barrier. Parents who reported difficulties in accessing childcare reported a range of consequences, including over half said that they worked fewer hours than they would have otherwise. Over 1/3 postponed or discontinued work, and I think this one surprises me the most. Over 1/3 actually gave up looking for childcare altogether. Finally, how concerned are parents about the accessibility of childcare in their community? Over 1/3 of parents reported concerns about childcare in their community. Of these parents, 63% indicated that they had accessibility-related concerns. Most parents with concerns were concerned that there were not enough early learning and childcare spaces available in their community. So taking this all together, what does it mean? First, accessibility matters to Alberta parents in their decision-making about their current childcare arrangements and in what factors they would consider if they could access any type of childcare arrangement. In some of our findings, parents with higher incomes and receiving subsidies prioritized accessibility. One potential reason for these results is that those with higher incomes and with subsidies may be less concerned about affordability and are therefore more able to prioritize other factors, such as the location of their childcare arrangement. Accessibility also appears to matter to parents in that parents have concerns about early learning and childcare in their communities. Across all of our accessibility findings, location figures prominently in parent decision-making, their preferences, and in their concerns. Second, Alberta parents reported trouble finding accessible childcare. Of parents who reported experiencing difficulties finding childcare, most reported an accessibility-related reason, and most reported experiencing a variety of consequences as a result. For instance, a large number of families, roughly 1 in 3, reported giving up looking for childcare altogether. The findings of this survey have led us to think about a variety of potential recommendations for the province to consider as it works to support Alberta families. As we have not yet published our accessibility report, please note that these recommendations are still in progress, and we would welcome any feedback and ideas you have. Our first recommendation is that the provincial government should dedicate time and resources to developing a detailed understanding of the views and preferences of parents regarding accessible early learning and care. Because accessibility appears to be an important factor in parent views and preferences, the government should regularly ask parents to provide details regarding which elements of accessibility are important to them and how they define accessible early learning and care, such as through the engagements like the provincial survey of parents the government is currently running. Parents could be asked questions about how long they are willing to travel to get to childcare, where childcare should be located, and the methods of transportation they would prefer to use. Improving the availability and convenience of early learning and childcare locations is important as it may promote greater parental use of early learning and childcare and thereby generate greater parental participation in the workforce. And both of these factors are key incentives driving government support of a publicly funded early learning and childcare system. Our second recommendation is that the provincial government should develop a thorough and sustainable approach for determining where early learning and childcare spaces are needed and making these decisions based on data. To develop an understanding of where spaces are currently, the government might consider 2 things. First, developing a systematic approach for identifying childcare deserts in the province using Alberta population data that are frequently updated. And 2, creating and regularly updating a map on where licensed spaces are located, such as using data from the childcare lookup tool, which is updated daily. To develop an understanding of how many early learning and childcare spaces are needed and where, the province should consider 4 things. First, measuring the 5 principles in a more holistic fashion, for instance, considering issues of accessibility and affordability simultaneously. 2, working in collaboration with municipalities to allow for local input and planning regarding community needs for early learning and childcare spaces and the ideal location for these spaces. 3, collecting and reporting data on early learning and childcare capacity on a regular basis. And 4, investigating whether the creation of centralized provincial, regional, or school district waitlists would benefit parents and early learning and childcare providers. Our third recommendation is to explore the creation of new early learning and childcare spaces in schools and other public buildings already funded by the province. There are often barriers, such as steep rents, that make using public spaces difficult or impossible. So steps here might include documenting public spaces that could be used for early learning and childcare, investigating the barriers to using these public spaces, and collaborating to eliminate those barriers. Our fourth and final recommendation here is to ensure early childhood education students are supported and incentivized to join the workforce and then remain in the workforce. Although the province aims to substantially expand the number of early learning and childcare spaces in short order, there are not enough early childhood educators available to operate new spaces. Affordable, accessible, and high-quality early learning and childcare is not possible without a well-educated and well-supported workforce. So we provided a brief overview of our affordability and accessibility reports, and so now we'd like to provide you with a picture of next steps for our study. First, we have more quantitative reports coming, so hopefully there'll be another invitation to join you here, and we'll be focusing on quality, on inclusion, and on flexibility. Second, our survey asked parents what high-quality childcare looks like to them, and we're using parent responses to investigate how parents conceptualize quality, and we are investigating whether there are any differences in how parents conceptualize childcare quality based on their demographic characteristics. And so this information will provide insight into whether there should be differences in how care is provided to different families. So to provide you with some concluding thoughts, as the recent news illustrates, the province is in the middle of some kind of transition that's going to be very important. And inevitably, as Jeff mentioned at the beginning, there are tensions, and we are seeing this in the media recently. And we hope that the findings of our study can be translated into something useful and positive for the province. We think that our survey makes a variety of contributions. Most importantly, our survey captures the voices of parents on their views and preferences regarding early learning and care in the province. Parent voices are so important as we make changes to and decisions about early learning and childcare in the province. In analyzing our findings, we make a series of recommendations that might support improvements in early learning and childcare. Our findings can be used as a springboard for future exploration. We have identified several directions for future research that our team hopes to explore. Our survey is also not unlike the important and valuable ongoing public engagement that the province is conducting via a provincial parent survey, which is seeking parent perspectives on early learning and childcare. This engagement is open until February 11th, and we encourage parents to complete the survey to increase the range of responses the province will receive. So this brings us to the end of our presentation, and we'd just like to conclude by saying that the province is in an exciting policy window for early learning and childcare, and we hope that our survey will provide some useful information that will support the province's important work for Alberta families. And so thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our work, and we look forward to hearing any feedback you have and answering your questions.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.